Shalom, shalom, YHWH, hallelujah. Coming with another video about Halacha that we as a people need to embody and turn back to the ways of our forefathers. So for this video, I will be talking about Mikvaot, or ritual immersions. So first, all praise and honor be to the Most High, and let's continue to rise Israel and turn back to the ways of our forefathers. For this, I'm going to be going to the book of Leviticus, the 15th chapter, to start off. Alright, and I'm going to read through the whole chapter so that we can get a full understanding of this. It says, YHWH spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, Any man who will have a discharge from his flesh, his discharge is contaminated. This shall be his contamination when he discharges, whether his flesh runs with his discharge, or it becomes stopped up because of his discharge. That is his contamination. Any bedding upon which the person with the discharge will recline shall be contaminated, and any vessel upon which he will sit shall be contaminated. A person who will touch his bedding shall immerse his garments and immerse himself in the water, and he remains contaminated until evening. And one who sits upon a vessel upon which the man with the discharge will sit shall immerse his garments and immerse himself in the water, and he remains contaminated until the evening. One who touches the flesh of the man with the discharge shall immerse his garments and immerse himself in the water, and he remains contaminated until the evening. If the person with the discharge will spit upon a pure person, he shall immerse his garments and immerse himself in the water, and he remains contaminated until the evening. Any riding equipment upon which the person with the discharge will ride shall be contaminated, and whoever touches anything that will be beneath him shall be contaminated until evening. And whoever carries them shall immerse his garments and immerse himself in the water, and he remains contaminated until the evening. Whomever the man with the discharge touches, without having rinsed his hands in the water, shall immerse his garments and immerse himself in the water, and he remains contaminated until the evening. Pottery that the man with the discharge will touch shall be broken, and any wooden vessel shall be rinsed in water. When the man with the discharge ceases his discharge, he shall count for himself 7 days from his cessation, immerse his garments and immerse his flesh in spring water and become purified. On the 8th day he shall take for himself 2 turtle doves and 2 young doves. He shall come before YHWH to the entrance of the tent of meeting and give them to the Kohen. The Kohen shall make them one as a sin offering and one as a burnt offering. Thus the Kohen shall provide him atonement before YHWH from his discharge. A man with whom there is a discharge of semen shall immerse his entire flesh in the water and remain contaminated until evening. Any garment or anything of leather upon which there shall be semen shall be immersed in water and remain contaminated until evening. A woman with whom a man will have carnal relations, they shall immerse themselves in the water and remain contaminated until evening. When a woman has a discharge, her discharge from her flesh being blood, she shall be in her state of separation for a 7-day period, and anyone who touches her shall remain contaminated until the evening. Anything upon which she may recline during her state of separation shall become contaminated, and anything upon which she sits shall be contaminated. Anyone who touches her bedding shall immerse his garments and immerse himself in the water, and he remains contaminated until evening. Anyone who touches any vessel upon which she will sit shall immerse his garments and immerse himself in the water, and he remains contaminated until evening. Or if someone is upon the bedding or the utensil upon which she is sitting, when he touches it, he becomes contaminated until evening. If a man lies with her, then her state of separation will be upon him, and he becomes contaminated for a 7-day period. Any bedding upon which he may recline shall become contaminated. If a woman's blood flow for many days outside of her period of separation, or if she has a flow after her separation, all the days of her contaminated flow shall be like the days of her separation, she is contaminated. Any bedding upon which she may sit, or she may lie, throughout the days of her flow shall be to her like the bedding of her state of separation. Any vessel upon which she may sit shall be contaminated, like the contamination of her state of separation. Anyone who touches them shall be contaminated. He shall immerse his garments and immerse himself in the water, and he remains contaminated until evening. If she ceases her flow, she may count 7 days for herself, and afterwards she can be purified. On the 8th day she shall take for herself 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves. She shall bring them to the Kohen to the entrance of the tent of meeting. The Kohen shall make one a sin offering and one a burnt offering. The Kohen shall provide atonement for her before YHWH from her contamination flow. You shall separate the children of Israel from their contamination, and they shall not die as a result of their contamination if they contaminate my tabernacle that is among them. This is the law of the man with a discharge, and from whom there is seminal discharge, through which he becomes contaminated, and concerning a woman who suffers through her separation, and concerning a person who has his flow, whether male or female, and concerning a man who lies with a contaminated woman. So we see from this that there were a few different situations mentioned. We see that a man, in the beginning it stated a man with the discharge from his flesh. The sages in the Mishnah understood this as gonorrhea. And also we have a man that has experienced semen secretion. We have a woman that has gone through her nida, or her blood separation, and the touching and handling of such people when they're in that state. And we see many times that it mentioned unclean or contaminated until evening. So I'll get to that when it regards to how a mikvah is to be performed and what have you. Another verse in the Torah that I want to bring out before I go into some of the things of the sages is Numbers chapter 19, starting at verse 14. So this is number 19, verse 14. This is the teaching regarding a man who would die in a tent. Anything that enters the tent and anything that is in the tent shall be contaminated for 7 days. Any open vessel that has no cover fastened to it is contaminated. On the open field, anyone who touches one slain by the sword, or one that died, or a human bone, or a grave shall be contaminated for 7 days. They shall take the contaminated person some of the ashes of the burning of the purification animal, and put upon it spring water in a vessel. A pure man shall take hyssop and dip it in the water, and sprinkle upon the tent, upon all the vessels, and upon the people who were there, and upon the one who touched the bone, or the slain one, or the one that died, or the grave. The pure person shall sprinkle upon the contaminated person on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, and shall purify him on the 7th day. Then he shall immerse his clothing and immerse himself in water, and become purified in the evening. But a man who becomes contaminated and does not purify himself, that person shall be cut off from the midst of the congregation, if he shall have contaminated the sanctuary of YHWH. Because the water of sprinkling has not been thrown upon him, he is contaminated. This shall be an eternal decree, and the one who sprinkles the water of sprinkling shall immerse his garments, and one who touches water of sprinkling shall be contaminated until evening. Anything that the contaminated one may touch shall become contaminated, and the person who touches him shall become contaminated until evening. So from this we see that it's dealing with somebody who has gone to a gravesite, or has been in a house where somebody has died, been in the vicinity of a corpse. Now granted, before that verse we understand that the animal that was used at the time was a red heifer, and the ashes were taken and then they were mixed in. Understanding we do not have that during that time, and our forefathers, after the red heifer, and they didn't have access to it, they figured out a way of how to still, to the best of their ability, interact with this mitzvah. And us being in the diaspora, we don't have the sanctuary, we don't have the mitzvah, we don't have the kohanim running, so we still should go by the ways that our forefathers back then, who didn't have access to this as the nation was waning, found better ways, or not necessarily better ways, but other ways to interact with this mitzvah. So now that we have gone to the Torah, some of the other things, first, when we're looking at Leviticus 15, when dealing with a woman that's on nida, you have the initial 7-day count from when her blood flow starts. That's when the 7-day count starts. If her blood flow doesn't last the whole 7 days of that initial first 7-day count, you still must count 7 days, as Torah states. You can't stop it and then start the 7-day count of white Torah is very clear that it's a set 14-day count, and that first 7 days is set. So from the start of her nida, you start counting the 7 days. And then after that 7-day period, and the second 7-day count starts, which is referred to as the 7 days of white. In order to start that off, a woman would do what is called a kefsek tahara, which is a special badika. Now, a badika is essentially a woman checking herself, whether it be with some kind of menstrual tools that she might have, in order to make sure that her bleeding has stopped, whether it be a tampon or what have you, to check that her bleeding has stopped. And she would do this. There's 2 ways that a woman can do this. She can either do this in the morning and the evening of every day of that second 7-day count, the 7 days of white, or she can do that during the first day of the 7-day count of white and the last day of the 7-day count of white. Some things that our sages said in the Mishnah about a woman who performs a badika, that the hand of a woman that performs a badika is praiseworthy. So I just wanted to throw that out there, just to be noted. Something else dealing with that is a nida mikvah, a woman that's performing a mikvah to remove herself from her state of separation. From the point that her nida started, it has to be 14 days after that time. So for an example, if a woman's nida came on at night after the sun has already set, she can't do a mikvah per se 14 days later at night, because Torah states that until evening is when you would become or you're contaminated. So the purpose of a mikvah is to be done before Bein HaShomesh, or before sunset, before the transition of the day to the night, because it's at that transition when somebody's contamination is removed from them. So in that scenario I was just describing, if a woman's nida started on that first day at night, she can't do it exactly 14 days later at night, because her contamination would not be removed until the following day at the transition of the day. So, but for a woman, let's say that her nida came on in the middle of the afternoon, and her 14-day count starts then, she can perform her mikvah around the same time, afternoon or shortly later after that, but she can't perform it in the morning because it's not technically been a full 14 days. Now granted, I don't know the hour breakdown of how long 14 days is hour-wise, but essentially you have to go through 14 days hours-wise before you can do it. So if a woman's nida came on in the afternoon, she can't perform her mikvah on the morning on the 14th day because it hasn't been a full 14 days. So I just wanted to make that clear. So some of the things that go about preparing ourselves for a mikvah, this is man and woman, is that first what is called a kafifa must be performed. Now kafifa is a thorough washing and an inspection that the individual does of their body, which essentially is a regular shower, like most of us do, but it's a shower and you're really checking your body to make sure that you don't have any scabs or anything kind of on you, which I'll get to in a second. But it's essentially a shower for layman terms. So what you're checking during this kafifa time is the removing of what's referred to as katzitzas. Katzitza or katzitzot are barriers that could be on the skin that would block the water from being able to touch that part during the immersion. So some examples of katzitzot is crust in the eyes, a dry blood stain that could be on your skin somewhere, somebody that might have scabs, wounds, boils, or blisters. Hot water should be poured on them so that they're softened. I mean, if they're at the point where they're about to fall off anyway, it probably would be best to just scrape it off. But if it's a fresh wound, just make sure that you soften it up. Another example of katzitzot is band-aids, bandages, somebody that might have neosporin on a scab, or lotion, some special lotion that they might have put on a scab or something like that, that should be removed. Somebody that might work in the field where they get dried ink or wax on their fingers, that should try to be removed. Some people that might work as painters, for an example, who might have discoloring of the hands just by the nature of the work that they do. For those instances, it doesn't count as a khatzitzot because it's a part of their daily living. But for somebody who might get some ink on their hands, some wax on their hands, and it dries, it should be removed. Some other examples of khatzitzot are for women, cosmetics. The day that a woman is to perform a mikvah, it would be in her best interest to not use cosmetics just because it can be hard to remove, and it does count as a khatzitzot, so just to be noted. Another thing that should be done is fingernails and toenails should be cut, men and women. Now granted, I know women do grow out their fingernails at times and what have you. If a woman is able to clean under her fingernail, if she does have long fingernails, then she's removing whatever khatzitzot might be there. But for men, we should cut our fingernails and our toenails before we do a mikvah. Also, removing jewelry, which is standard. I mean, you wouldn't get in the shower with jewelry anyway, so definitely removing jewelry, and also brushing your teeth. Also removing any mucus from the rim of your nose. If you have any boogers hanging out, you definitely want to get those too, but it doesn't require you to dig all the way up in your nose to get stuff out, but mucus and what have you that's around the rim of your nose, you want to remove that. And also wax out of your ears, you want to clean your ears out. Now, braided hair or locked hair, that does not count as khatzitzot. So for those that do have braided hair or locked hair and might be worried that the water isn't going to reach that part of their scalp, that does not count as a khatzitzot. So just to be noted. Also, other people can be used to help you with your mikvah. Something that was mentioned in the sages is that for women, when they would perform their mikvahs in bathhouses in antiquity, when we were in the land, is some women would help other women make sure that their whole body was immersed in the water at the same time, because sometimes their hair might float to the top or it might not fully be immersed, so another woman would help them immerse in the mikvah bathhouse. So granted, in this time, if somebody were to do that, the person that's helping the individual perform their mikvah should dip their hands in the mikvah bath so that their hands, in a sense, have been cleaned or richly immersed as well. So another thing, people who might want to perform a mikvah in a natural body of water, whether it be the ocean, a sea, a river, there's leniency around performing a mikvah in those environments. When it comes to the mud or the sand that's at the bottom of whatever body of water that somebody might want to use, that mud or sand at the bottom of the water does not count as a khatzitzot, because it sticks to your feet, and you might think the water's not going to reach all parts of my body, but it does not count as a khatzitzot. But the mud or the sand that might be on the riverbank or the seashore of whatever body of water that you're going to use, that does count as a khatzitzot. So when somebody is walking toward the body of water and they get in the body of water, they should wash the bottom of their feet off first before they perform the mikvah. Now granted, something that might be in question is that a mikvah that's performed in somebody's house in their bathtub is not effective. Now granted, us as YHWH, being that we are dispersed throughout the nations, do any of you guys know anybody that has a mikvah bathhouse that like our forefathers built? I mean, I don't. Granted, I know that there are mikvah bathhouses in different synagogues or shuls or what have you, but I'm speaking about YHWH right now, the nation of Israel. So for us, we have to do the best that we can while we are in exile, because ultimately the Most High sees our intention. He sees the genuineness that we have behind trying to draw close to him, trying to be set apart and embody the ways of our forefathers. So I just wanted to note that for those that will be performing mikvahs at their house, in their bathtubs and what have you, those that will be embodying this practice of our forefathers. So how the immersion is actually done is the person should, in the water, they kind of squat down and, in a sense, kind of fall in the water. You don't want to fall back, like you're baptizing yourself like Christians, but you do want to, kind of dip your way into the water. You want to avoid trying to, form access creases in your body, because you want the water to be able to reach all parts of your body when you're performing the mikvah. And when when you're reciting the bracha, you want to not look in the water. You don't want to look down, because you're going to be naked, so you don't want to look down when you're saying the bracha. It would be good to say it with your eyes closed. You don't have to, but generally my practice, I say it with my eyes closed. But when you're saying the bracha, you don't want to look down at your private areas when you're saying the bracha. So the way of when a bracha is done, for men, both hands should be used to cover our private parts. We should cover our privates when we're saying the bracha, because when you're saying the bracha, you're still going to be in the mikvah bath. You're still going to be in the water. So you want to, as men, cover both private parts. As women, one hand you want to cover, and the other hand you want to cover your breasts while you're saying the bracha. And the way of doing it is you can dip in the water, come out, say the bracha, and then customarily people would dip again, or you could dip twice, and after that second time you can say the bracha. It's really just to make sure that the water has touched all parts of your body. So the bracha, and I will say the bracha in Hebrew. I'll tell you what it means in English, and then I'll make sure that the bracha is posted so that you can pause the video and write it down and do with it as you please. So the bracha is Baruch atah YHWH Elohenu Melek ha'olam asher Kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al Tavilah, which means, benevolent or increased are you, YHWH, our Elohim, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to perform in regards to the ritual immersion. So I will make sure that that's posted so that you can see it, and you can write it down, go about embodying this practice. It's a very good practice to do. As men and as women, it's good to do mikvahs before our annual feasts. Before the 7 annual feasts, it's a very good practice to do the day before a feast is about to come about. And also it's a good practice, to do before Shabbat every week. It's really about how close an individual is trying to draw to the Most High. I mean, some of our forefathers in antiquity, they did it every day. So it really falls on the individual and how close they're trying to draw to the Most High. So when it's actually performed, you want to perform it before sunset. So the kafifa and the mikvah should be done before sunset, and especially because they're linked. You want to do the kafifa and make sure that you're ritually clean to go about doing the ritual immersion, and this should be done before sunset. So at sunset, after you're able to see 3 stars in the sky, because that's when you know that it's sunset, when you can see 3 stars in the sky. You want to be able to have already done your mikvah, and you're already dried off, and you're good. So YHWH, it's good. I really enjoyed relaying this halacha. I really hope that many people embody it. This is a great practice for YHWH as we continue to rise as a nation and draw back to the Most High. Hallelujah, and all honor and praise be due to him always, and continue to grow, Yisrael. Shalom, shalom.